You're listening to Viewpoint, a podcast of Highlands Church. Well, welcome everyone. Viewpoint is a podcast discussing challenging cultural issues from the Bible's point of view, and we want to equip the church to be able to encounter the world around us with the truth of the gospel. I'm Brendan Anderson, the Weekend Services Pastor at Highlands Church in Scottsdale, and I am joined, as always, by our Pastor of Adult Education, Joe Infranco. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks, and great to be with you as always, Brendan.
All right, well, this is part 2 of an episode that we're doing about school choice. What kind of school should Christians send their kids to? The United States, Arizona in particular, is where we're located. It affords us so many different choices of how to educate our kids. And so in part 1, we certainly talked about kind of the biblical perspective on education. Joe gave us a little bit of a history lesson on what education looked like even in biblical times. We talked about some of the principles that we as parents want to have as Christian parents, thinking about how we might educate our kids. And so now we're going to come into part 2, again, in the middle of this discussion, looking at specifically a Christian private school versus public school versus even homeschool options. And hey, if you haven't listened to part 1, jump into your podcast app, go find part 1 of this episode as we continue on. But again, we have 2 great guests along with us. We have Kenna McGrath, whose husband Tyler is one of the pastors here with us at Highlands Church. And Kenna has 3 kids that they have sent through various school situations, but eventually all to private Christian school.
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me. This is a great discussion.
And then we also have Joe, your daughter, Leanne Deering, who is homeschooling her kids and has been doing that. Her oldest is now 12 and walking through the homeschool journey as well.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here with you guys.
And Joe, it's been a great conversation so far.
Yeah, as always. And let's drill down now more in part 2. We're really going to get more into the personal experiences of all 3 perspectives. We'll go a little deeper into what are some of the responsibilities. We'll say a little more about some of the misconceptions. So I'm looking forward to this. Brendan, let's shift to you in public education. And you already talked a bit about some of the conceptions and misconceptions with public education. So let's shift instead to something that you touched on that I think our listeners would like to hear more about that. And that is the need for parents to be highly involved in the programs and the curriculum in school. You checked out schools, you looked at the programs, you met people. For parents who are considering public education and see some of the benefits of that, what would you recommend to parents in terms of checking out what the public school is like, learning about the curriculum? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a tendency to look at public school and think of it as this monolithic entity. And a lot of times it's painted in a lot of circles as this big monster that is the enemy. Well, in some cases, there are these big overarching district-wide policies that you certainly want to be aware of. But really, when it comes down to it, your kids are going to a school, has a principal, and at any given year, they have a teacher or a couple of teachers. And that's really where we've tried to keep our focus. Certainly, my wife and I have heard of public schools and experiences that our friends, even our friends among our church friends, their kids are having these experiences at public schools, and it sounds horrendous. There are some situations that are not great. I've heard that across any kind of school experiences. So it's really individualized. I think we have to kind of fight the tendency to be like, oh, public school, just generalize in this huge, and think, no, what about this school? And that's really what we wanted to do by touring schools initially, to say, well, how can we feel good about this individual school? Maybe find out a little bit about the district, the school board. Those are some things that you can kind of look into through news articles or whatever it might be, but really focus in on the school. And then you're right, the involvement level is really, I think, what leads to success, or at least gets us in a place where we're able to take on challenges that might come up. And so getting into the school, knowing the principal, and for us initially, it was just getting involved in a way, going to meet the teacher, meet the principal, have at least a little bit of a conversation. And for us, it was just letting them know, hey, we're here, we're excited to be at this school. We want to support you. Teacher, do you need school supplies? How do you let parents know of the needs that you have in the classroom? Are there ever opportunities to volunteer for us to stop in? Are there field days or assemblies or things that parents can go to, and just kind of open up a dialogue? And for us, it was also just expressing a desire and willingness to serve at the school for opportunities. A lot of public school teachers, if you say, hey, could you just email me anytime you have a school supply need? Their eyes light up like you are Superman. I mean, they love it. And so letting it be known to the individuals, the teachers and administrators who are in direct contact with your kids each day, that you're there for them, that you're for them, you're excited for that. That establishes a relationship that then, if challenges come up later in the year, you've already got a relationship, a personal relationship with these folks that you're able to then address those types of things.
All right, well and good. Let me play devil's advocate, pardon the expression. And I always tease Brendan. He's brimming with optimism. He has a strong case of Minnesota nice, is always assuming the best in people. And I love that about him and all. I hear the cynics listening to us saying, sure, I go to the principal and say, this is what I like. Oh, they'll smile and they'll say nice things and sure, volunteer. But, as soon as I leave the room, I know what's happening. They're rubbing their hands and they're thinking more kids to indoctrinate. Or, if it's not quite as overt as that, they're thinking, well, the kids are here. They're going to learn what we're learning here. So it feels like, yes, you might on that level feel like I'm meeting people. They seem nice, but you don't really know the worldview that's being communicated. Maybe not so much on a conscious level, where there's a scene in a classroom and some boy says, oh, I like that dress. And another boy says, boys don't wear dresses. And the teacher just, without really thinking, just from training or background says, well, stop that. Some boys do wear dresses. So let's not talk about there are things like that can be subtly communicated that you don't pick up on. Talk to the cynic listening who says, hey, Minnesota nice doesn't work in every school district. And how much attention do you pay to your kids' assignments? Do you review every assignment? Do you ask them, what did you learn in school today? Do you ask them, what's the teacher talking about when you're not actively being instructed? Oh, yeah, we were learned about pronouns today. Get into a little bit of that. How much are you actively monitoring lessons and all?
Yeah, quite a bit. So communication with the people who are educating your kid, for sure, but also just communication with your kid. We've tried to establish as a family, just in general, a rapport of, at the end of the day, we're sitting down to a family dinner. Now, it doesn't happen every night. We're busy just like everybody else, but trying to prioritize the family dinner time at the end of the day and establish from a very young age, everybody's just sharing about their day. What was your day? What kind of things did you talk about? Asking open-ended questions and just being in a rhythm so that our kids are just used to talking about that stuff. And periodically, especially when they're young and they don't really have as much of a filter or, things like that, they'll just bring up like, oh, somebody said this, and it'll come out of left field. You'll be like, whoa, okay. And you'll ask maybe a couple more questions. That might surface something that then I'm going to email the teacher about, hey, Jack brought this up. I was just curious. Was this a thing? Was this in passing? What it is? Start that discussion. Again, then that goes back to, do I have a good relationship with this teacher, or do I have a contentious relationship with this teacher? Do they know I'm for them so that when these challenging types of things come up, we can actually have a productive, they don't think I'm attacking. They know that it's something that I'm just wondering about. And then, yeah, we are fully eyes open, public school, and just the direction our culture is going. We are 100% going to encounter moments in their classrooms in which they are hearing approval or promotion of values that are completely opposite of what we would want them to be following as Christians.
I love the way you're setting it up, because you've got the three-legged stool of New Testament education. You have, the family, for the Jews, it was family, synagogue, specialized education. What you're talking about is you're not overlooking the role of the family as the essential place where moral instruction is given and all of that. So you're able to say, hey, if you're learning this in the specialized education area, bear in mind what your value system is. Understand somebody has different values. Doesn't prevent you from learning something useful, but it reminds you of who you are. And again, your kind of equivalent of the synagogue would be, Christian education that happens at church or Sunday school programs or things like that. So if you're keeping those in place, the public education that deviates in some respect is not a threat. It's something where your child is grounded because the other components are in place, the other legs of the stool, if you want to think of it that way, are there, and you have the perspective. So you can have a Christian going to a professional school, medical school, or law school, and learning what you need to become a Christian professional. And, at the same time, having the right perspective, so you're bringing faith into those professions rather than being afraid of them.
Yeah, and certainly the Bible is clear that we are exiles within the culture that we live. And so the earlier that I can help my kids learn what it looks like to be an exile, and that means feeling different, thinking different, they're going to have to do that as they navigate this world as they go. And so in a public school, that might mean that some of the conversations that I think every family should have for us, those conversations might happen quite a bit earlier than some families would even be comfortable with. But if they're going to encounter that, if suddenly I've got a teacher who is really big on the pronoun thing, well, we're going to have that discussion at home in a significant way. And I'm going to have that conversation with the teacher as well. Hey, how is this working out in your classroom? And hey, that might be the thing that says, you know what, we're going to have to change schools. And we're completely open to that, but we want to have those conversations in a way that recognizes that the world is going to be the world. The culture is the culture. We can't change that. We have to learn how to interact. Romans 12, right? Don't be conformed, but be transformed by the renewal of the mind. The renewal of the mind for my kids has to happen at home when we encounter the cultural issues that are going to run contrary to faith.
I really like this. I think that there's value to Christians learning what the world thinks and believes in non-Christian areas. And I think there are different ways to look at this. And Ken, I'm working my way back to you to ask a question about kids being in a bubble. The Apostle Paul was schooled in Judaism. He went to the equivalent of the seminary, and yet he clearly studied Greek poets, philosophers. He understood other things. When he was on Mars Hill, he was quoting a well-known poet and philosopher from Crete. So he had exposure to those things. I love the fact that, when I was a kid, I loved mythology. I read mythology nonstop, all kinds. My oldest grandson, Jack, has inherited that from me, and we talk about mythology, and it was eye-opening to me to read C.S. Lewis talking about his love for mythology, how in mythology there are the seeds of truth to point to Christianity. I don't look at it now at the same way. Some people might look at it, it's stories about false gods. I see it addressing something about the human character and needs and all before people had an understanding of Christ. And it's actually something you can use to have something in common with a person, to say, hey, let me explain that to you. So I love, again, the connection there. And that's, Ken, I think, a good way to transition back to this question about private school exposure to kids. Where we want to go now is, what are some of the responsibilities that parents have? And one of the ideas that people have about Christian school, where maybe we have a responsibility as parents, is that kids in Christian schools get raised in a bubble. They're in church, they're in Christian school. Yeah, they see some things, but there's basically still kind of a Christian consensus. Then they go to work for a, Fortune 500 company, and they're thrown to the wolves. They're totally unprepared. They've never seen these things, and they just don't last. They don't hold up because they have been in a kind of a bubble. They've not been sufficiently prepared. So does anything come to mind for you on responsibilities of parents? Is there some need to be preparing them for what's coming in the world? Are they exposed to that enough anyway? Thoughts on that?
And that's a great question. I mean, again, there's definitely an added layer of protection that exists, but one of my son's closest friends that he made, because their family switched in fifth grade, they are not believers at all. He would come home from their house and say, man, I sure do like that you guys don't cuss so much. And I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, what's going on over there, But at the same time, it was like, all right, like Brendan said, well, let's have a discussion about this. And why does that bother you? And so I feel like, at least the way Arizona schools are now and how much choice and how much fluidity there is for families to come in and out, that the bubble felt good to me It was an extra layer, but it's not so much of a layer that I don't feel like my kids have come out the other end and have felt like, what in the world is going on out here? I had no idea. Not at all. They felt plenty prepared. And again, back to even just having dinner at home, you just have to kind of implement these family discussions and do the best you can to talk about what you're seeing on the news, which we don't watch a lot of news, but it doesn't have to, you just have to have a cultural awareness of what's happening and have a space to talk to your kids. But having them be in a private Christian school is not necessarily going to shield them from that. But at the same time, I like that it shields them in a season where you can make some pretty massive mistakes that you can recover from, hopefully, but it protects them at a time where their brain development is still so critical that I felt like, okay, it gets us through a 4-year window, at least for us, having just our two older go to high school. I thought, all right, for 4 years, there's not a perfect bubble. They can still find trouble if they want to find it. We still need to have good discussions. I still needed to be involved in the school. I still volunteer. Again, all the teachers are believers, but some were interesting. I mean, there were certain teachers where I just thought, they are not my favorite. I can't put my finger on it, and that's okay. We would talk with our kids about that, but they could come out the other end and go, okay, now, and still your brain development's not really done till you're 25. So college age is still a pretty big window where you can make some pretty dumb decisions, but it got us through a season where I feel like it could have been a lot worse, but you still have to be pretty involved nowadays because the world has changed so drastically that I don't think you can just send your kid to a Christian school and think that'll take care of it. If anything, it can make them a little bit more apathetic. That was how my husband came out of Christian school. It's like, I'm sick of chapel. They have chapel every week. They go to church service on Sunday. So they're sitting through 2-hour-long services a week that they just sit there, and it can definitely breed some apathy. And so you have to have discussions about all of that.
Yeah. And look, all of us and our children are in the world. Our goal is to say you're in the world, but you're not of the world. Statistically, our kids are likely to outlive us and someday, perhaps be training their children and onward, and training their children to train their children to train their children. So what we're really doing is giving them a blueprint for how to live and how to face situations that previous generations didn't face. My parents were not able to teach me about the dangers of the internet. Well, that's okay. I don't expect that. But I want to have learned the principles that allow me to navigate, those waters and then pass those on to my kids to navigate the unique issues that they're going to face. Leanne, same kind of question, added responsibilities that go along with your choice to homeschool. Again, some people might be thinking there's the added responsibility of making sure your kids interact with other groups or that they develop peer-to-peer relationships, but are there any others that come to mind for you?
I think, and what I'm hearing, that all three of us have this in common, which is our first responsibility in any setting is to know the child. Part of what I love so much about homeschool is I have the gift of teaching to them in the way that they need to be taught. And conversely, I know what Jack does under pressure. I know what Rosalind's struggles are. I know what sets off Finn's temper. I have a really good sense of what they are ready for in terms of what they can withstand. And I don't want to be overly negative of the idea of providing. I know nobody wants to live in a bubble, quote unquote, but we are called to insulate certain facets of our child's exposure to the world and its temptation and its pressures. So I've heard it called a greenhouse before, and I love that analogy. Let's let our little ones, our children, our tweens and teens continue to grow those deep roots before we give them over to really intense scrutiny and persecution from the world. And I'm not saying that that's what they're getting in other educational settings. I think this applies actually to all three of us. But so that's what I like in homeschooling is I'm able to really give them that space to develop the deep roots of faith. The world is going to test them whether I like it or not. The world is going to find them. My son is now having to research papers online and things, and we've had to have conversations about what do you do if you click something and it's not what you expect. My heart breaks that I have to even have those conversations with him, but I know the world is going to find him. So I'm not overly worried about, I want to phrase this carefully, I know it's going to get in one way or the other. So my responsibility, I believe, first and foremost, is to know my children before I send them into different settings. One might be ready for something before another, and that's okay. And to equip them and rehearse with them what to do when the enemy finds them. Does that make sense?
So good. It makes me think of Daniel chapter 1. Daniel is a young man who's taken to Babylon, but he had his roots in his Jewish upbringing, his knowledge of God. And you see right away in Daniel chapter 1 that Daniel purposed in his heart. Some translations say he determined in advance that he was not going to sin against God. So as a young man, because the foundation was built, he was able to deal with every situation that came along. First one was not wanting to eat the king's food, which violated the Jewish dietary laws. But Daniel was able to thrive and serve multiple kings and multiple empires and have the highest reputation, but he never compromised his faith in God, knowing who God was. And, he became one of the 4 major prophets. And so you see when that foundation's in place, our children and those after, can deal with what we can't foresee now. Okay, let's wrap up this way. We'll go around one more time. I'm going to ask, starting with Brendan, to describe some of the outcomes so far, what's positive, what's negative, what's unexpected, and then just add to that, what advice would you give parents looking to navigate these decisions? If you could kind of summarize what you've learned so far, the parents out there saying, hey, I'm about to enter these waters, what do you recommend on public education?
Well, we are certainly blessed that our public school education so far it just really has been a blessing for our kids. They have thrived. They have, as I mentioned before, they have made friends and met people outside of our usual kind of church friend Christian area, and we've been able to encounter families that we would have had no other reason to encounter and form new relationships. And so just the wide variety of the services that public schools have been able to offer us. There's a gifted program at our kids' school that has just really been a huge blessing, spearheaded by a teacher who is just really in her wheelhouse in their development of reading. Certainly public schools' option to offer varied programs like we're in a dual language immersion is an incredible benefit. And so we've seen some really neat outcomes for our specific situation. And again, I love the throughput for all of us here talking about looking at the individual needs of our kids. The school situation that we are in has engaged their minds in a way that we just feel blessed by. And so we've seen some great things. We've also seen some hard things where, in a public school setting, kind of mentioned social media, phones. Certainly we have families that certainly don't share any of our perspectives or values, and that's going to be the same at a Christian school as well. But we have had lots of discussions already about, yes, those kids do that, or those kids have that, and we're not going to do that, and we're different. Here's why we're different, to be able to have those conversations. And so sometimes those are challenging conversations, but it's, again, a great way to be able to go back to the foundation of why do we even do the things that we do, and open up the Bible and talk about it.
And those are evangelical opportunities as well.
Yeah.
When you're meeting families and the inevitable question, what do you do? Well, I'm a pastor at Highlands Church, right? That opens a door for discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And just even, I talked about the idea of being involved in our community. I've asked for and received the opportunity to, I run a dad's breakfast at our school. I said, hey, could I run a thing twice a year for dads to just come? I'll bring free bagels and donuts, and we can just do a little program of encouragement that comes alongside what the school is teaching. And they said, yeah, that would be great. And so I'm in there, and I'm not teaching Bible, but for instance, our school has a thing about encouraging kids to be themselves. I'm like, well, I'll lean into that because the Bible tells us that God's made everyone uniquely, and when we come together as a community, our unique attributes can support the whole in a way. So I basically ran a dad's breakfast teaching 1 Corinthians. I didn't call it 1 Corinthians, but I was teaching the principles of one body, many members. And I can bring that perspective and try and encourage the families around in even a public school setting in a way that I hope is contributing to the community.
It's a great thought. You're a witness in the public schools. And I don't want people to miss the importance of that.
Yeah, I think we have a great opportunity, and ultimately I'm going to push my kids towards that as well. Hey, you know what? You can tell your friends that you're not going to join in that because of your faith, because the Bible says that we want to act a certain way, and there's reason for that. We believe that it's best for us to do those things. One of the biggest pieces of advice is, I would say, to do public school in community, not just get to know the teachers and administrators, but your kids' friends, form a community. If there are other Christians that you know of that are attending, maybe form friendships with those families, because my kids aren't going to ever tell me everything that happens in the school. But we've got this great community of families around us that we know from the school, from our kids' classes, our kids' friends, that they'll bring something up. We'll get to talking, and we talk regularly, and they'll say, hey, did you hear about this happening at the school? No, I didn't, but I would really like to know about that. And so we kind of insulate ourselves against being taken by surprise by maybe a perspective or a teaching or something that we maybe need to talk with our kids more specifically about. Because again, it might be a cultural thing that's running contrary to a Christian worldview. And so the advice would be to, go eyes open, get involved, and don't do it alone. Do it in community with other families that really kind of share your perspective.
Great thoughts. Thank you. Kenna, let's get to your closing thoughts. What have the outcomes been so far? And you've got two done or nearly done with their high school level education, so you've got some good perspective. Positive, negative, unexpected outcomes. And then closing thoughts, what advice would you give parents to navigate these waters?
Yeah, no, these are, again, great thoughts. I think advantages would be things like, again, a lot of stuff we've already covered. There is a slight bubble, which was helpful for us. You've got Christian teachers, a slightly safer, just a different environment on campus. Definitely more families with similar beliefs, but still an opportunity to share and be a witness to people who don't know the Lord, or, call themselves Christians, but go to church a couple times a year, and that's about the extent of it. And they're much more focused on their kids' sports. So there's still an outreach opportunity here. And even with just sports, both my girls were cheerleaders, and Ryan's played several sports. And that's definitely an advantage as well at a smaller school. My girls for sure would not have done any of that at a public high school with thousands of kids, and they were good. They loved it, and it developed their leadership, and it kept them busy and active, and built them. They were able to have a community within a community. And same with my son. I love that he can just stay after school and hang with his friends and play sports. They don't really have cuts, or at least they haven't had to much. They'll just form teams based on who's playing and kind of do a developmental level. So for him to get to play sports, we weren't a big club sports family. We don't have the time. A lot of games were on Sundays. With us being in ministry, we just drew that line early on. And I'm not down on club sports. That's not the point, but just it didn't work for our family. So my son's behind in some ways. So he gets to be at a school now where he can still do all of that. And I'm not having to cart him all over the valley to do it. He can just be at school and do it. So those are some definite advantages. Some disadvantages, as again, I've talked about, there's still issues with the bubble. It's not as safe as it is, as you might think it is. And if your kids want to find harder issues, and kids who maybe aren't the best influence, they are at Christian schools as well. Class size could be a pro or a con for us. For us, it was mostly okay, but my oldest daughter's class was 45 kids. So when you have girl drama, and you will, even at a Christian school, there's nowhere else to go. There's not a lot of other people to go hang out with. My middle daughter's class was 80, still small, but almost double. So that made a huge difference. So you do have to kind of weigh every class. We will have noticed that at this school has a very different feel. So most schools, I'm sure even public schools, I think you can go shadow, but for sure at our school, you can do a shadow day, and they'll pull a leader type of a kid who might be in student government or spiritual life, formation, and they'll come take your child for the day and kind of, again, I don't know what age they do this at. I don't know if it's for elementary, but you can shadow, and that both my girls did that. And that was very, very helpful to get a feel for who would I be hanging out with. And so those are just some of the basic pros and cons. And I think my closing statements would just be a couple thoughts. One is, as much as possible, try to ask yourself, and this is really hard, but where is this decision coming from? Am I making this decision out of fear and out of I'm scared and I don't want to be scared, so here's what I'm going to do, versus what would benefit my child? How would this help them, even if this isn't what I thought that I would maybe do? And obviously leaning into the Lord, a lot of prayer about that. But I just see, especially in our culture now, and just making a lot of fear-based decisions. And I just think we have to be really careful about that, because that turns into high control and then high worry and high micromanaging. And that's just generally not great for our children. So I just want to kind of put that out there. And then secondly, I would say, especially from when I ran our moms group, that, and I think it's only getting worse, unfortunately. And I don't know, again, if that's a social media thing and we're able to compare, but there's so much guilt for moms. There's a lot of mom guilt about, I'm not doing what this person's doing, or my kids aren't where this mom's kids are. And it's probably because she made this decision and I didn't make that decision. And oh my goodness, all of our families are different. And I'm hearing Leanne and going, oh my gosh, homeschooling kind of sounds amazing. And if it would, but even in the 15 years from when my girls started, it's already changed so much that when they were starting, it just wasn't a good fit for me. And I had to be okay with going, I love my kids, but I actually need a break from them. And I'm okay having them be in school for 6 hours and I'll pick them up when it's done. And that separation was actually really good. And then that allowed me to run our moms group for 5 years. It allowed me to go back to Phoenix Seminary and get my master's in counseling. And those are both things I feel like God really put on my heart. And I don't know that I could have done that had our kids been home. And so I had to be okay with not feeling guilty or not feeling like I'm not a good mom because I don't know that this certain fit, that it's just not going to fit for me. And can I be okay with that? So I just want to encourage moms to really pay attention to some of that, because we can make a lot of poor decisions out of intentions that we don't even know are there if we're not looking closely.
Great thoughts. And I'm so glad you addressed the fear aspect of that. That's so prominent in the thinking of many people, and it hasn't come up in our discussion so far. I think that's advice everyone should heed. Am I making decisions out of fear or my own anxieties about something compromising what might be best for my child? So, Leanne, last but certainly not least, experience so far. What are the positives, negatives, unexpected things? And then your closing advice for people entering this, what would you recommend to them? How should they think this through?
Oh, so much to say, but Kenna, first, I'm just going to let you know that your situation sounded amazing to me more than once during this interview. So yes, to the mom guilt. I'm not surprised to hear that this is consistently what comes up at moms, because it feels like such a monumental decision. The negatives are that I would be lying to your listeners if I didn't say that it is hard. It is hard. One of my favorite quotes is from Charlotte Mason. She's one of that's the educational philosophy that I follow. And she says, education is an atmosphere, a discipline, a life. And as the homeschooling mom, I feel a lot of pressure to create that atmosphere and that discipline daily. It's a continual process of being reminded that I can also teach from rest, to quote Sarah Mackenzie, to rely on the Holy Spirit to fill in the gaps for me. And as I'm diligent, to know that the Lord is going to lead our family year over year. I will also say, and this is consistent with what both of you have said, my husband and I always say we're taking things year by year. We look at each of our children every year, because especially Jack is 12, he's a preteen. I want to begin to lay the foundation for a lifelong friendship with my son. And so if we came to a point in his high school somewhere where he said, Mom, I really want to try this or that, I am really open to letting him experience different educational settings. Sorry, I feel like I got off on a bunny trail. Okay, I was talking about how it's hard. It is hard. That's the negative. The positive is that my children, even with a really big age spread, 6 months to 12, are doing their childhood together in a really beautiful and significant way. I still see them growing up together. The sibling closeness has been a remarkable gift. That is not to say that every day we're having picnics and frolicking through fields of lavender, but it does mean that they have genuine friendships. We have a genuine shared family language, both from the literature we read aloud and from all this time that we've poured into each other. That has been very beautiful, and that I hope and pray will continue to reap a harvest even beyond what I can see right now, kind of still in the trenches. What
would be your closing advice, your wisdom?
So with homeschool, this is going to sound a little silly, but I mean this. Just try it. Like if you're someone who it's always in the back of your mind and you're kind of ruminating on it and you're doing the, I want to, but I don't know how I would. And it's consistent and you're not able to put it down. That means I would say just try it. Give it 1 year. We are so fortunate in Arizona and really in our country that we have so many wonderful choices. If it doesn't end up being the decision that you make for your child's entire education, That's okay. I know friends who have homeschooled for a season and it was wonderful. And then the Lord called them to something else, something very specific. God's calling is not the same for all of our families. But I would encourage you. I have had a lot of mothers say to me, oh, I want to do it so bad. I think about it every year. At the start of every school year, I pick it up again and I want to do it, but I don't. If you're that person, I'm talking to that person right now, just try it. Just try 1 year. Commit to 1 year. That's it.
Yeah, and there are lots of resources. Is there a site, a website, or a place you could recommend to people who are thinking homeschooling sounds great, but it's overwhelming? Where can I get information, find out options?
So that's a difficult question to answer just because it matters where your listeners are in the country. In Arizona, we have so many co-ops that you can look into. Excelsior, Branches, Classical Conversations. There's a number of Charlotte Mason groups, as I alluded to. So many wonderful curriculums to look at. I would say, it sounds a little funny, but get on Facebook and look at local homeschool groups near you. That's a great way to get plugged in and see what's available. Get on Google. You will be astonished at how many choices there are in your area.
This has been a great conversation. Brendan, I'm going to kick it back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the encouragement, if you are a listener who is from Highlands Church, the encouragement would be, man, this is a reason why we say engage in community with others. Get in a small group with parents of kids of about the same age. Have these conversations over dinner, over extended periods of time. Be a part of a mom's group. If you're not a part of Highlands Church, be involved in a local church. I think that's a huge foundation to having successful education. No matter what path you choose, to have a strong church community to be able to lean on is essential to be able to navigating so many of these things. And so talk to other families, talk to parents. If you need advice on where to turn, or if you have specific questions that follow up, you can always email us. We've got an email address here at the show. It's viewpoint@highlandschurch.org. And we'd be happy, best we can, to point you in the direction of things that you might have heard mentioned on this program today. But I can't stress enough to be thinking through, talking through, and making these decisions in community with other faithful Christians that you're doing life with. And I hope that that's a reality for you. So as always, if this show has been a blessing to you, encouraging, we'd invite you to share it with others who might benefit from this same info. We'd love it if you do that. We'd love it if you'd subscribe on whatever podcast app you happen to listen to. And if you're really excited about it, we would also welcome even a little rating or review. Again, not because Joe needs validation. He's a very secure guy. It doesn't need that at all. What it does is it tells these internet algorithms that this is content that is useful to people, and it'll start suggesting this program to other people, because we would continue to love to be able to equip the church, certainly our church, Highlands Church, but really church, Big C Church, in how the Bible can speak to the issues that we see in our culture and how we navigate this world that we are temporarily a part of, wherever it is that God has us. And we will see you next time.